Because right now, leaders are also scared. They know everyone needs to work differently, but they don't know how. They may be more open to hearing some solutions now than they previously have been in the past. So it's definitely not the time to sit back and see what happens. It's the time to rally our organizations toward a new goal, to transform our workplaces so that they are more in line with human potential. Now, I'm happy to say we're already seeing some glimmers of hope in that direction. Crises tend to magnify both the ill effects of bad habits and the positive benefits of good ones. And suddenly, leaders are recognizing just how inefficient the system was. I heard one leader talk about how much more efficient he's been by using Zoom for face-to-face meetings. He doesn't have to travel. He can get to the point quicker. And what used to take several hours or even days can now happen in 15 minutes. So who knew, right? Meetings conducted virtually are requiring more efficiency. And people that never thought that they could work from home now find that they can. Of course, there are exceptions, but the point is that our mindset suddenly shifted in a matter of days instead of years. People and organizations will rise to the challenge because they have to. There's no going back to the new normal. And if you can't continue to pursue business as usual when the entire world has changed. And consider this. The toughest barrier to change is always status quo. We won't change until we have to. But because we're now forced to, the status quo has been removed. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but I believe that companies that adapt quickly will not only survive the economic turbulence ahead, but they'll also thrive in the aftermath. The tide was already turning in the direction of collaboration, agility, inclusivity, and empowerment before the crisis hit. And the skills that I'm about to tell you about will help any organization capitalize on these trends. So hopefully you've revved up and now you're ready to have a positive impact on your organization. But before I show you how to do this, you have to first understand how we got here and how the system itself is what's causing the problems of inefficiency and inflexibility in the first place. It all starts with the command and control operating system. Now, we call this directive leadership because it's based on directing or handing down orders for people to follow. This is why the lines of authority on the org chart are so important to leaders, so they can tell whom they have authority over what to do. And you all know how much focus the leaders like to place on those org charts. So much so that when we ask leaders to tell us how their business operates, they proudly whip out that org chart and show us. And then we ask, okay, if this is the map for your business, can you show me where the customers are? Or how does this explain how your business processes operate? Or what does your product development process look like? How is that depicted in this org chart? Now, it's clear that they can answer these questions verbally, but they also recognize immediately the lack of information on the org chart. And even so, they still can't let go of them. But it's not their fault, though. We've been working this way since World War II. And in many of our trainings, my colleague, Kathy Cassidy, has torn up the org chart in front of them and forbidden the leaders to talk about it for the rest of the day. We just can't get past the lines of authority on the org chart. And it's important to understand this because cross-functional collaboration is not about authority at all. Now, more on that in a few minutes, but suffice it to say that this directive leadership way of operating is broken. It's kind of like trying to operate Adobe Photoshop on MS-DOS. And ultimately, until it's fixed, you'll continue to have problems with functional silos that create competing priorities, toxic behavior, and general disempowerment and disengagement. Now, it's not like leaders are unaware of these issues. They're losing good people. They want cultures that attract top talent. They want competitive advantage, efficiency, productivity, all that good stuff. But the problem has always been that they try to fix these problems through the lens of the org chart, lines of authority, and who reports to whom. Which is why most leadership training that's brought in fails to address the underlying problems in the first place, because oftentimes it's directive leadership in disguise. Project management training is a great example of this. Anything that you want to accomplish in an organization that's new or innovative is accomplished through projects and initiatives. Initiatives being projects with an internal focus, like we need to fix our payroll system, develop a new marketing strategy, or build an IT infrastructure. But instead of training everyone on how to lead projects collaboratively, they believe that someone has to be, quote unquote, in charge. And so they bring in a project manager or send leaders to project management training. In reality, traditional project management tools work best when managing complex projects with a predictable outcome, like building a space shuttle or defense contracts. But because the overwhelming majority of projects aren't that complex, you don't need advanced project management tools like earned value analysis or advanced risk assessment. Project managers are taught to collect input from other stakeholders and then develop the project plan and documentation single-handedly, delegating tasks to a team. Now, leaders typically approach collaboration the same way. They collect inputs from a few stakeholders and give careful consideration to incorporate the best ideas into their decision-making process. Leaders might even feel good about the fact that they've included everyone's input, but they're still making the ultimate decision and assigning tasks to the team. It's simply not collaboration. Now, I'm not going to accuse these leaders of a grand conspiracy against collaboration. Many of them are trying to do the right thing, but because they only know directive leadership, they can't fathom what collaboration actually looks like. Again, this belief in that the organization is run by the org chart is the root of all the problems of inefficiency in your organizations. So until you change the mindset of leaders and the overall governance of the organization, you'll never completely build a collaborative culture. Again, I don't mean to discourage you. This is a big problem. It's highly ingrained in most of our organizational operating systems, and it certainly won't get fixed overnight. But if you truly want to have an impact, you have to start training leaders in a way that they come to this realization themselves. And that means not biting off more than you can chew. So if you get nothing else from this webinar, I want you to at least be able to evaluate the types of training that you're bringing into your organizations to make sure you're not reinforcing this directive leadership. Now, I know that's difficult when leaders are asking you to bring in training because, quote, we need people to work more cross-functionally, where they have absolutely no intention of participating in the training themselves. So let's talk about how to do this, regardless of where your leaders' mindsets are. For leadership training that's going to improve organizational effectiveness in a matrix organization, skills must be taught based on the horizontal dimension as opposed to the vertical one. Now, let me back up just a bit because the terminology here is really important. A matrix is a complex organization that requires people to work cross-functionally to do their jobs. It's the recognition that your organization operates in two dimensions. The vertical one, the one where authority exists and is depicted on the org chart. And in the vertical leadership model, you learn to make the decision, draw up RACI charts, delegate work, create performance plans, and take control over what goes on in your area. And there's the horizontal dimension. This is where leaders and professionals work together without authority. For example, marketing needs to work with sales. Sales must work with project or product management. IT and HR must work with everyone, and so on. In every matrix organization, the horizontal dimension is the most important one. because it's where all the work, like through business processes and projects, all that work actually gets done to deliver your products and services to your customers. Now, if you have more than 50 employees, you can go ahead and consider yourself a matrix. And if you're under 50, you still want to work more collaboratively, then this is still for you. There is no authority in the horizontal dimension. So think about it. How are you going to tell somebody in a different department what to do? In fact, that need for authority to get people to complete work is how we got dual reporting in the first iteration of matrix management. Because even though it correctly defined the organizational works, or that the organization works in 2 dimensions, they tried to fix project managers' problems of not being able to get projects completed because they lack the authority by giving them dotted line reporting or solid line reporting in some other cases. But that was a disaster then when they implemented this in the 70s and 80s, and it's a disaster now. The fundamental flaw in the whole system is that it requires authority to get people to do work. Or in other words, if you don't tell them what to do, they're not going to do it because people are ultimately lazy, right? So let me ask you, do you need to be told what to do and how to do it? Now that's different than asking for mentorship or direction. I'm talking about do this because I said so. But look, as a leader, you shouldn't want to tell people what to do anyway. It's annoying. It's kind of like, that's why I hired you. And we hear this frustration from purpose-driven leaders all the time. For example, one CEO we worked with expressed his frustration with bringing in new talent because they were so brainwashed by the hierarchy in their past positions that they were afraid to take the ball and run with it. The question that most leaders have is, how do you lead across these organizational boundaries when you don't have the people reporting to you and where you don't have authority? So the answer is to train them on how to lead without authority. And next, because the horizontal is the network of business processes and projects, when you bring in leadership training, it has to help them navigate and work across this dimension and improve organizational effectiveness collaboratively. Don't expect your leaders to be aware of the horizontal dimension. They're not going to ask for it because they're stuck in the vertical. But making this mental shift is necessary if you truly want people to work collaboratively across functions. And think about it. How are you going to get people to work more cross-functionally if you don't even know how those functions fit together in the first place? What stakeholders need to be involved when you're forming teams? Who has subject matter expertise? And so on. I'll give you a real-life example of how leaders are so stuck in this vertical mindset. We worked with a pharma leadership team to set up horizontal governance teams, something we call steering councils. And we suggested that they pick the best team leader to head up each team, regardless of their level in the organization. This, of course, goes against the vertical mindset, which makes decisions based on your place in the hierarchy. The person with the highest position, according to them, had to be the team leader. They weren't trying to import the hierarchy from the vertical dimension into the horizontal, or they were trying to. And in the horizontal, it doesn't matter what your title is. What matters is whether or not you can facilitate a team, which is another skill, and we'll get to that in a second. As I said earlier, to lead in a matrix, you have to work in 2 dimensions, the vertical one and across areas in the horizontal one. If you want to be good at collaborative leadership, we're going to need to learn new ways of being, new skills, new tools, and new methods for getting things done. You can't simply use the same old power-based approaches in the horizontal dimension and expect to be successful. It's just not going to work. And in fact, not only does your approach in the horizontal needs to change, but eventually how you lead in the vertical is going to need to change as well. So the first thing is to facilitate teams. The concept that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, attributed to Aristotle, remains as relevant as ever in today's interdependent environment. The mutable modern world calls for leaders who can create and harness the power of high-performing teams. Again, your goal is to push decision-making down to the team level. Therefore, the ability to facilitate teams without deferring to directive leadership is really the first key skill, because even the most skilled individuals do not have all the answers. So to be successful, they'll need to apply the full talents of the team to the task at hand by engaging each member in the co-creation process. That means the leaders need to learn how to guide group members through a structured collaboration whereby they determine the best possible decisions to solve problems, create plans, and produce deliverables through consensus. Facilitation has not traditionally been trained as a core competency for leaders, but it needs to be, because the horizontal is all about collaboration, and collaboration needs facilitation. Also, learning how to facilitate rather than direct also reflects a fundamental shift away from command and control, and is a skill that needs to be taught to everyone, because everyone collaborates across the enterprise. Cross-functional teams are how work gets done in the horizontal, and just handpicking a number of stellar individuals won't guarantee that they will work together well. And high-performing cross-functional teams are how work gets delivered in every complex organization. So the ability to build high-performing teams, regardless of who reports to whom on the org chart, is the second key skill that we need to teach to leaders. This means understanding how a team is developed and helping them move through the stages of team development so that the team that is supportive of each other, and that they solve problems together, work through conflict, and sets up everyone on the team to be successful. Moving forward, the leader manages group dynamics and builds trust through honest communication and meaningful commitments that support the team. The third skill is the ability to facilitate collaborative processes like decision-making and problem-solving. In these collaborative processes, the team works through a set of steps that help to make the best possible decision or solve a problem or create a plan. And to do this, the team needs to learn the process of decision-making or problem-solving, and the leader needs to step back and facilitate, as we talked about before. Collaborative tools are critical to collaborative leadership, but here's the twist. The collaborative tools are really for the team, not for the team leader. The team creates the plan, not the leader. The leader is not the technical expert, but the person who plans out the process to follow, and then facilitates through it, helping them to get through that high-performing stage of team development. To take on this role, leaders need to let go of that positional power that I spoke about earlier, which doesn't exist in this role anyway. Being able to facilitate the team to work through the process and helping them become high-performing so that they can work together. Now let's talk about relationships, because relationships in the horizontal are built on equality, not authority. So the fourth key skill is the ability to build partnership relationships. In a partnership, both parties are fully invested and bring 100% to the table. They create win-win solutions. And in the horizontal, the customer is not king. We don't bow down to them and give them whatever they want. The customer is a partner in the process of development, and we develop the solution together. Matrix leaders also need to be able to sell, influence, and negotiate. And they need to be able to mentor others to success. You have to sell your ideas and influence others to buy in. You need to be able to negotiate win-win solutions with senior leaders on behalf of your team, and you need to be able to mentor team members and direct reports. Leaders also need to be good team members. Some of the time, a leader leads a team, but often they're a team member on a different team. And that's especially true if we're talking about horizontal governance teams. So the leader needs to be able to be both a team leader and a team member. They need to be able to take off their functional hats, put on their organizational hats, and fully participating as contributing members of the team. And remember what I said about project management being directive? Well, because projects are the first way in which an organization comes together as a matrix, all leaders need to be able to lead projects and business processes collaboratively because they are the main focus of the horizontal dimension. Now, I'm harping on projects a lot because it's a great place to start if you're in a really hierarchical organization. It can have some very transformative effects without being so disruptive to the hierarchy that you have to worry about getting your hand slapped. And consider this also. Since a successful matrix leader is one that knows how to lead collaboratively, by learning collaborative project leadership, you're filling two needs with one deed. Improving project delivery and, ultimately, strategy and developing matrix leadership skills. So once your leaders have mastered collaborative project leadership, then you can turn your focus on business processes. That is, unless you're in manufacturing, and then you better learn business process management first. Now, the Corona crisis hasn't caused the problems that we're currently facing. It simply magnified the inefficiencies in our hierarchical operating systems. Now, these are some big problems, and I'm not suggesting that they be tackled all at once. And especially with very ingrained hierarchical organizations, it simply can't be done in one fell swoop. But even though most organizations continue to operate under authority-based management systems, the cross-functional nature of modern workflows creates opportunities for employees at every level to serve as leaders. This situation, in turn, offers OD and HR professionals new possibilities for shaping leadership development programs. But bringing in traditional leadership development programs that focus on maximizing individual productivity will not help advance your organization toward a sustainable strategy. If we want to achieve all the things we say we want to do, we have to start training our leaders completely different. Companies that don't already have a collaborative culture can start the shift through leadership training. Specifically, human resources and organizational development professionals should look for programs that help managers transition to coaches and facilitators. The change will be gradual at first, but adopting this more flexible and empowering approach to leadership will show employees that the organization respects and values them as contributors. Greater engagement and collaboration will create a more agile organization, improving its ability to weather the economic turbulence ahead. Even though many questions remain concerning the current crisis, one common theme that has emerged is that of strength in unity. So the bottom line is this: if you're going to evaluate leadership training for an organization that wants to be sustainable, you have to ask yourself, is this directive or collaborative? What are we training people to do? Give orders or facilitate teams to make a decision? Thanks a lot for listening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Cassidy for questions to answer. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box. And I will see if we can get Kathy unmuted here.
I'm here. Can you hear me, Jason?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's see. So one question we have come in is, let's see. So in evaluating leadership training, can you talk to me a little bit more about what some of the leadership training looks like that is really directive, and how do I really know the difference from talking to the salespeople, so to speak?
So one of the key things, so I kind of switch that up a little bit, and I think about looking at something that aligns to what is this truly collaborative? I think, Jason, you talked about this a little bit, right? But if you think about the definition of what true collaboration is, it really is that you have this full team that's participating and that they are co-creating. You talked about the team making the decision, the team co-creating the plan, and that the tools are helping them to reach consensus. And in our methodology, consensus means 100% can live with it and support it. It's very hard to get to agreement. So as you start to think about training programs that you're putting in and you want to improve collaboration, look across at the tool and the process that they're teaching and say, okay, does it meet this criteria? Does it engage the team, or does it have my leader making decisions by themselves and sharing information, right? If you go back, it's about collecting input. That's directive. So I've seen different project leadership programs where the project leaders all come to training and they learn about the tools. And then they sit down and they do the tools, and then they bring the team together, and then they bring up the screen and they share the schedule and everyone is looking at it. Or I've even seen where they learn how to do it really good, they learn how to use Microsoft Project, and they email it out to everyone. And yes, that's faster, and the leaders become proficient in those tools, but it doesn't get you integration. It's not collaboration, and it really doesn't create buy-in and commitment. So what you really want to do, especially, Jason, as you talked about the facilitation, is measure whether the training is developing that skill in addition. So I need to be an expert in the tool, but it's about being an expert enough to be a guide to lead someone else through that tool. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yeah, totally. And also, could you talk a little bit about how authority works in this collaborative model?
Sure. Well, in this course, like you had talked about how authority doesn't exist in the horizontal dimension. So one of the key things that some leaders get nervous about is that authority doesn't exist at all. And it does exist in an organization, but it really exists as a last resort. And it does exist only in that vertical dimension with that leader that has that solid line reporting. So when we're in this horizontal cross-functional work environment, right, leaders need to understand that the hat they're wearing, right, at that point is a specific role outside of the box that they have on the org chart. So they are thinking about, how do I engage this team, right? How do I actually bring them together and move them through a process so that they're bought in, so that they're empowered to do that? If I have authority in that moment, and a lot of leaders, I'm sure a lot of you deal with this, is that my direct report happens to be on my project team. One of the hardest shifts for those leaders are to let go of the authority line in the context of that team. And that's, Jason, you talked about mindset shift. There's a big mindset shift that leaders need to start to have. And I also put it on team members as well, because sometimes they don't step up enough to that. But in the context of the cross-functional team, we are in a relationship that we call team leader, team member, and there are certain rights and responsibilities and accountabilities tied to that. When you think about the vertical, which is shown on the org chart, I'm in a relationship of coach or boss, most people are using that term, to direct report. And in that relationship, there's a certain accountability tied to that authority as well. And for us, it's tied to setting that person up for success, developing their skills and their knowledge so that they can be successful in horizontal teams. So one of the key things I would say, just to kind of summarize the authority piece, is that when you're in a matrix, right, or you're in a cross-functional organization, you may not call yourselves a matrix, you have to recognize that you may have authority, it exists in one dimension, and most of the time I'm working without it, and separate those two, and really don't try to replicate the authority you have or that leaders have in that horizontal dimension, because that just continues silos and to continues where people are not empowered and working together.
And you
stop there.
Yeah. You mentioned accountability there as well, and I know we get a lot of questions in talking about how accountability shifts in a more collaborative setting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The accountability system that you have, and a lot of OD and training people really can be on the forefront of examining that, and I'm sure you've experienced it. That really is a pivotal driver in behavior and how goals get executed. And when you're in a directive type of system, an authority-based system, what typically we see is that the accountability system really is focused on individual results and individual outcomes. And it really does drive this, I'm aligned to my part of the organization, and that's my most important part. And leaders recognize that, yes, you work on teams outside your area, but that's secondary. In a matrix, what we look at is shifting how your accountability system supports collaboration and cooperation versus create a system of competition. So we use 3 types, and the 3 types by name: organizational accountability, you do what's in the best interest of the organization, you align to the priorities. Team accountability, connected to any teams that you're on, and individual accountability. As a leader, you're going to have all 3 types, and you want to make sure that you understand where you have that. But I really like to give an example, because in a team, because we're talking about cross-functional teams, we need to create connection. So we want a leader who would have individual accountability for that team outcome. And here's a key point. Individual accountability is never shared. One and only one person has accountability for something. They're there to ensure it happens while they build organizational relationships. What we do, though, is anyone who sits on that team has team accountability as well for that outcome. So immediately, we connect the team leader and all the team members. What starts to shift and really starts to help organizations shift their culture is that if you can start to move the needle that says team accountability takes precedence over your individual accountability, and even in the context of that team. So if you have a project team and they're all delivering a new system, and that system's been broken down into parts, well, each person on the team has a part that they have an individual accountability for. But because they're all together sharing team accountability, we want them to all focus on making sure the team goal happens and they're not competing with each other. So as you start to think about collaboration in your organization, take a step back, right? Look at your accountability system. Do you think it's driving competition? Do you think it's driving people to focus on just their parts? Or are your leaders shifting so that they're owning things, but in the context of leadership, they as a team share things, and then they each drive a part of the organization as well. So it's not just the training pieces, and you can train on accountability, you can teach people tools. We use tools, we have an individual accountability portfolio and a team accountability portfolio that helps you document what you're accountable for or what you've committed to. And after you go through the collaborative process, it gives you an opportunity to really show people up front, here's what I'm driving, here's what I'm committed to.
And I'm sure you work with a lot of hierarchical organizations, especially where the leaders I mentioned say we need to work more cross-functionally, and then they're not really willing to participate in the training themselves. So how do you deal with that?
So that's a change, right? And yes, I'm sure a lot of you, if you've dealt with change, right? If change comes from the top down, it can stick, right? It just has more support from that perspective. But doesn't mean if they don't buy in that change can't occur from the bottom up, and I find that does happen a lot. So if your leaders won't participate, then it's clear that there's some resistance to either letting go of control or the power, right? You talked about positional power. Very hard for people to give up, especially if that has been your whole career and your generation, and your career has been the way I get recognized is to move up the org chart. And when you take that away from people, and I'm saying it doesn't exist, but they feel it's taken away and it's not the path, they get resistant. What I say is that in the collaborative environment, right, in a hierarchical environment, let's say, having teams work through certain tools, and start to think differently is a great way to show how collaboration can help and start to hopefully inform that the hierarchy needs to break down. So real life example, we trained years ago a company, on project leadership and project training. And it was for Six Sigma teams. And they knew the Six Sigma process. They knew that they were doing what they needed to do from a business process improvement. And it was all across the organization. One group realized that these were projects and they weren't running well. So they trained everyone on the team on how to actually plan this out, set what they needed to do. And what they found from a team perspective was that the projects were running better. They were running faster. The team was working better together. So they didn't try to affect this huge change. They figured out where in the organization it was wanted and would help and deliver. And so they focused on that part. And what started to happen was leaders across the organization started to see, well, why are those teams doing better than these teams? They're working on similar projects. And it was that they were collaborating better, that they were doing the planning together. Didn't matter what function you were from, they focused on the project. So as you start to think about, if you're in a very hierarchical environment, where's the first place that is in the most pain? Who needs to collaborate more? Start there. That way, people don't get their hand slapped for trying something so big. And that's very risky. And we've worked, Jason, as you know, we've worked with some very hierarchical companies where there's such fear to step out of line that people don't do anything. So it's what small increments can you do that brings to light that this approach works better. Hope that helps, Jason.
Yeah, very good. Okay, it looks like that's all the questions that we have. I know that, Kathy, do you want to talk about our upcoming Foundations of Matrix Leadership that's starting on June 3rd and what that entails?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So this program is 100% virtual, and it's designed to be able to support people across any type of organization. And it's a program that really sets the stage for helping to start this mindset shift and develop some knowledge and some skills and some certain tools to start to think horizontally and to work differently cross-functionally. So our approach is, it's a 10-week, we do a 30-minute kickoff to start, but then every other week, right, with a lesson, and then you do a debrief the week after on the phone so that we can talk about that lesson. So the self-paced learning to start, and then we debrief and we try to apply that, and any question is open that people come up with. We've run this multiple times already, and it gives us an opportunity to really start to talk about how they would apply their thinking. The topics they cover in this Foundations course is to help people understand what makes their organization a matrix, what are the two dimensions. They do exercises on seeing themselves where they fit in the matrix. We talk about mindset and what's the right mindset when you need to lead without authority. And they get to assess themselves and start to really have those introspective opportunities to think about how they're doing as leaders as well. Talk about relationships. We teach them a tool called a relationship map, where they start to really identify where they might have functional and dysfunctional relationships. And then we introduce accountability, and we talk about what true collaboration is in this program, so that at the end of the 10 weeks, we've really covered these foundational pieces that start that shift of thinking, that give them some key things that they can start doing. And we've run them publicly. So this is a public session, June 3rd. So it's nice. We connect people across organizations and try to create connections with learning partners. And we've also run them as intact for organizations. So we started late last year, finished in March, a program for an intact team. There were about 32 leaders. We split them up. And what was really powerful about that is the leadership themselves, they were able to start having different conversations with each other. And the awareness that was happening at the same time was very powerful for them. So the one on June 3rd is public. And if you're interested, please reach out to Jason about that.
Yeah, and I will put my email address in the chat box as well. So thanks a lot for that, Kathy. And in closing, I just want to say that it's my belief that organizations that truly embrace collaboration are going to be the sustainable ones and most likely to emerge stronger after the crisis. And for the sake of ultimately bringing our work environments more in line with human potential, I certainly hope I'm right. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to having you at our future webinars.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.